He was a longtime congressman in the state of Texas, known as Dr. No. Ron Paul will not be remembered for all the bills he worked to pass. He's remembered for all the bills he worked to stop. He has never been president, never served in a presidential administration, never won a presidential nomination, never even elected to the U.S. Senate. And yet Ron Paul is arguably the most influential politician in modern American history. And his influence wasn't gained because of media. In fact, it was gained in spite of it. Dr. Paul now has his own media channel, the Ron Paul Channel. He has a remarkable story, and he knows better than just about anyone the need for truth in media. The first step toward truth is to be informed. Dr. Paul, first of all, thank you for sitting down with us and talking with us this afternoon. Tell me a little bit about the explosive growth of the liberty movement in this country, especially in the last 4 to 5 years, has just been remarkable, and it's something that many people, especially political pundits, didn't seem to see coming, and yet the growth is so rapid, and most people, most thinking people would say that Ron Paul is at the center of that liberty movement. Has it surprised you at all to see the kind of growth we've seen in the last few years?
It sure has, because I've been doing the same thing for 30-some years, but something did happen between 5 and 6 years ago, dramatically different. And the best I can make of all this is, first, is that there's been a lot of groundwork done. A lot of philosophic changes. There's been a lot of teaching. There's, 30 or 40 years ago, there was no group of people studying Austrian economics and talking about the issues of liberty. And it was just smoldering along, but it was still planting a lot of seeds. But then, where I noticed it was sort of like a bolt of lightning was with the collapse of the economy in 08 and 09, because that sort of confirmed many things that we as Austrian economists have talked about, that there's a bubble, you watch out, there's going to be a correction, it's going to be a tough one. And that woke up a lot of people, and it drew their attention, say, to the Federal Reserve. So it was this confirmation that the system wasn't working. But the other thing was available like never before was the spreading of this message outside the government sources. And I place sometimes television close to the government sources, because there's really not a fair and balanced approach to news. So, but with the internet, with the concerns and the failure, and of course I've talked a lot about foreign policy, the failure of the foreign policy, all of a sudden, it spread like wildfire. And I can recall that, when it was sort of leaked in 07 that I was probably going to run for the presidency, I had no idea how many people were out there. I don't think anybody knew. And all of a sudden, it wasn't our announcement. Somebody else sort of leaked it. And all of a sudden, thousands and thousands of calls on the internet, was really stirred up. And they told me, well, somebody said this and it went viral. And I said, well, I'm a physician. I don't know about that kind of a virus. So I learned about a new virus, and that was it. And of course, we've been seeing it expanding. I think it's going to continue. I think it's a blessing. I think it's wonderful. I hope the government never can control the internet, because that's our weapon that used to be secret. It's not so secret anymore, but that's why liberty has a real chance at winning this fight.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because I know one of the battlegrounds that you have talked about really with a lot of focus, especially since the election, has been the internet, the importance of keeping the internet without these strict government regulations on it. You've seen the bills like SOPA and PIPA, these intellectual privacy or intellectual property bills, that have been designed. But a lot of folks will look at those and say, those aren't about intellectual property at all. It's really about controlling information. How does the liberty movement and how do Americans work to keep essentially government hands off of that source of information?
Well, it's going to be tough. When things are relatively calm in a country, as far as violence goes and wars going, people are a little more protective of civil liberties. But just think back 10 years ago after 9/11, people were really very careless about their civil liberties, and they allow things to go through, like the Patriot Act and different things. So under certain conditions, it's going to be much easier, and we're bound to have difficult times again. And they're bound to say, well, this message is being spread through the internet, so therefore we have to crack down. And I think it's an ongoing. I think it's. I think they're in the business of knowing everything that we do through the internet. But the only thing I'm hoping, without a clear understanding of how big and how the internet works, I hope it's so big that they can't do it, and I hope it's so sophisticated that the market will always protect us so that we can have some privacy and the government doesn't know every single thing that we're doing.
When you think about the liberty movement and some of the things that have transformed over the past even 2 or 3 years, you talked about running in 2007. In 2008, in that election cycle, you set an all-time record in terms of donations that came in through something called a money bomb, which no one had ever heard of before. It was clearly grassroots, and it began to send, I think, shockwaves through the political system that you might not have to go through the normal gatekeepers in order to really be a political force. We saw that even more so in 2012. Moving forward from here, what do you see in terms of a shift in this left versus right paradigm that's been almost fabricated in this country?
Well, first, as far as this thing about the fundraiser goes, it was amazing that happened. It was spontaneous. It wasn't top down. It was people who agreed with the message, and they spontaneously spread this information through the internet. And I remember shortly that particular day when we raised like $6 million and broke all kind of records, I would go to the floor, and other members of the Congress who were friends but not philosophic allies. They'd sit down and say, Ron, it is great. We're really impressed. They weren't impressed with my message, but they were impressed that I raised $6 million one day. Tell me what the technique is. How do you do this? They had no idea. They thought it was some way that we had some secret information on how to use the internet. But the internet was being used spontaneously by a lot of people, and we're actually spreading this message. So I think that's a big difference, but I think it just opens up the door for us, to spread this message. And it gives us a chance to emphasize, left and right. This whole thing, there's always this big fight. Who's going to win the budget battle and who's going to do this? And that's all a distraction. I think elections are distractions. 90% of the American people know absolutely that the difference between our last two presidential candidates, Republican and Democrats, it made all the difference in the world. Well, there's a lot more people now coming to the conclusion it really doesn't make any difference. Mm-hmm. You elect one party, they talk differently than the other, but policies never change. Mm-hmm. And I think what the internet offers us is trying to get the truth out. And I think that's one of the most common comments made by young people when I talk to them about, I ask them why they're interested, and they said, well, you're telling us the truth. I think they see through this, and they see through this whole idea that, if you just elect one party or another, you take the current president, was, believed in, a different type of foreign policy, he was going to treat the drug war differently, but he did nothing, and people see through that. But I think that is the most important role for the internet, is to get the truth out.
Well, let me ask you this, because you're alluding to the talk about the drug war, or about foreign wars. President Obama obviously had a lot of rhetoric when he came into office. A youth movement seemed to be behind him. It's a youth movement that's in many ways abandoned him because they didn't believe that he was honest about what he had been saying. You, on the other hand, have also been kind of the recipient of a youth movement. Certainly the Liberty movement is a youth movement. And as you said, if you put your picture alongside President Obama in any magazine and said which of these candidates should be kind of the head of a youth movement, a lot of people, just based on appearance, would say he does. President Obama is certainly the youthful candidate. And yet when you look at the demographics of the people who have really rallied behind you, they're all over the map. But certainly there's a very strong youth movement. There are pictures of you at UCLA when you're speaking there in Berkeley, and really at college campuses all over the country with thousands upon thousands of college students with signs that say things like "in the Fed." who have this understanding of economics that far exceeds what their parents or even grandparents understood. Are you an unlikely person to be the head of a youth movement?
Well, it seems that way. People would have never predicted, including myself. I thought my role was to speak out and set a record, and leave a mark that maybe somebody would look at later on. A lot of people say, well, how did you last so long? Why didn't you get so frustrated living up there in D.C. all that time? And I really went with expectations that not much is going to come of all this. So I personally didn't hold my breath and say, I'm going to be the leader. I'm going to be the president. I'm going to do this, and the world's going to change tomorrow. I think I would have been very frustrated because I saw it more long term. I saw it as an educational effort, and therefore I wasn't, I didn't get too upset about the whole thing. But I really think the progress and the has been a little bit more than I expected. So I really didn't see myself as getting this much attention. But I have to admit, I've sort of enjoyed it in the sense that I like young people thinking, not because I'm getting this personal attention, I like it because I look at those young people and they say I'm giving them encouragement. But they give me encouragement to say, here's a whole large group of people actually listening to this and believing this. And then I think, why aren't we more optimistic about young people? When I argue with some of the conventional politicians and those older people, and I talk about my optimism with young people, I said, I wished I could meet them. I said, well, come to one of my rallies someday. Maybe you'll meet somebody that, is thinking about these issues.
It's interesting that you have talked about these issues. For instance, you had talked about right after 9/11, you were very critical of the Iraq War, you were critical of the Afghanistan War, you were critical of foreign intervention, certainly the drone strikes that have taken place in Yemen and Somalia and Pakistan. You've been out front on the drug war for a lot of years, and even on issues of marriage. And you look at the stances that you've taken, really, as you said, over 30 years, but even recently as the last election, and a large part of, I would say, the Republican electorate, as well as Republican media, conservative media, have come out against you and had said, well, these are terrible ideas and that's not what represents us. Flash forward to today, just a few months after the election, and it seems like the entire Republican Party is scrambling to figure out how to adopt now that same message.
Yeah, they're slow learners. and I always wonder about it because, we got the large crowds. Young people were interested. We had a lot of support. And the Republican Party said, we have to reach out. We have to reach out to the different groups. We have to reach out to the young people. But they never want to ask me, what do you think about how you reach out to young people? I've never had a Republican leader ever say that. We've had Republican leaders exclude us from conventions and a few things like that, and sort of, offending many of those supporters. Here they were willing to come into the party. They weren't naturally Republicans. They were willing to come in. It's really tough for them to stick with the Republican Party after being treated that way.
Did the Republican Party declare war on those folks during the convention? They didn't allow you to speak when you had every right under the rules of that convention to do so.
We had the delegations.
You absolutely did.
And we had a lot of support. Take, for instance, and there was sort of a collusion between what they were how they were handling the election, plus how it was reported too. How many people in this country know that I won Iowa?
Right.
We had the whole delegation. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the bellwether. If you can win Iowa, you go on and you help build momentum. But when the election was announced, I was a close second place, and they talked about first and third.
Mm-hmm.
So
they talked about first and third, correct?
Yeah. So that turns off young people because they're looking for some honesty and straightforwardness and discussion and talking about the Fed and civil liberties, and they don't like war. But so far the Republicans haven't quite gathered that. I think it shifts. I think governments eventually reflect people's attitudes, and I keep talking to the people, change your attitudes and your government will change. And It won't be just the Republican Party. If the goal is just to change the Republican Party, that's too narrow. Mm-hmm. And I always refer to the Nixon quote about, we're all Keynesian now. Yeah, all Republicans and all Democrats are Keynesian. They all believe in economic planning. Someday, we're all free market people now. We all believe in freedom. We all believe in property rights and voluntarism. That will be the day that we'll win.
So let's talk for a minute about media collusion, because you have alluded to this a little bit. During the election, cycle and the campaign cycle, certainly. I actually became aware of you, by the way, because I had viewers who started contacting me saying, why is the media blacking out Ron Paul's campaign? Which, quite honestly, I thought was silly as a question, because I thought how is media blacking out his campaign? Then I started actually paying attention to it and realized that, in fact, that appeared to be happening, especially on the national level. And there were things happening within the system. Certainly, we talked about these rallies with so many thousands of young people there and never once saw a single picture
on TV.
Anywhere. How important is media in this fight for liberty and getting that liberty message out? And how do you overcome what seems to be a clear media bias against the liberty movement?
Well, it's becoming less important every day, thank goodness, because that's not where the young people are getting their information. That's probably why we've had a greater attraction from the young people. Because when I first started in politics in the 70s, we basically had three major networks. And they were very, very close together on philosophy. They weren't identified. Now there's a lot of stations that have a Democrat and Republican partisanship and all that going on. But now the options are great. Not only, even in TV, there are many, many more stations. There's cable stations, there's talk shows, and the information is still slanted toward government. I mean, you don't hear from the normal television, which is cable plus regular television, of arguing the case for true liberty. But now the information is going out differently. It's going out on handheld devices and computers and telephones, and they can turn you on when they want, and they can turn you off when you want. And they have so many more choices. And then if they find something that they like, you know, I just, even when I was in Congress, I knew how the Facebook and all worked, but it was since I've been out that I paid more attention to these numbers. And you have so many friends, but then when you take your friends, if you have a million friends, you might have 150 million people who are connected to your friends.
That's right, the friends. I mean,
the numbers are startling on what happened. And it's going to take an awful lot of government to close that down, unfortunately. But we still should be very cautious about government efforts to do so. So
at this point in your long career, are you shifting now more toward being a voice in media?
People say, are you retiring? I said, no, I'm retiring. I'm not retiring. This is finally getting exciting because the vehicles are available to us. So it's going to be through radio, it's going to be through internet radio, and it's going to be through visual things, and it's going to be the homeschooling movement. So there's anything that is available that I can utilize and encourage others. Actually, it's not just me. I might bring people together, but the message should be a universal message. The numbers are growing, the vehicle is there, and all we have to have are more people who love liberty, and we'll win the fight.
Well, now that you've been informed, it's time to get engaged. Go right now to benswann.com. There you're going to find the sources for this story as well as other Truth in Media episodes. And you can help us to create more of these episodes. All you have to do is click on the link on the right-hand side of the page to learn how you can support us, either through dollars or even through Bitcoin. Go right now, contribute, get informed, get engaged at benswann.com.